I should give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from here, I guess. Like the Feathersons up the front, my family have been around this area since the late 1800s as well, primarily in the Corindi Red Rock group. And like them, I'm sure there are lots of photos from the old days with big hauls of fish pulled out by people and the like. But I've sort of been living around the area on and off most of my life and been involved in a number, as a community representative on a number of committees spanning local government, estuary and coastal management committees. I was on the first two advisory committees, I think, for the Solitary Islands Marine Park. I've been on catchment management committees and the like. And I'm also a member, I think, I'm not really sure about this one, of the Marine Parks Advisory Council at present. And I'm a scuba diving rep for all scuba divers in New South Wales on that one. Scuba diving, I think what I'll do is actually take a slightly different tack to many of the other speakers here today. And basically, the first thing I wanted to do is talk to you about, well, why scuba dive? I mean, I know why I go fishing, and I am a keen fisherman because I like to go and have get a feed, and I really enjoy just sitting out there catching a fish. But there are probably lots of answers why people scuba dive, and one of those is the amazing seascapes that we witness. It is really, really, really amazing drifting along a steep wall looking off into the blackness of the deeper parts of the ocean, or drifting over the complex three-dimensional structures of a coral reef. So these seascapes that all of you, I guess, have probably seen in documentaries, to experience them firsthand is really something else. Tranquility. I mean, we all live busy lives. We jump in our cars, we head into town, we've got stoplights going, we've got mobiles going. But when you're actually sitting down there on the bottom of the ocean, it is quite tranquil. There might be lots of frenetic activity happening down there with little fish doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but it is really tranquil. You've just got a few bubbles that you're exhaling, and you can just watch the world go by. It's one of my favourite pastimes as a diver, in fact, is just to go and find a quiet place on the bottom and sit there and watch the world go by. It's all about self-control as well, and I think this is a really important attribute of scuba diving. It can be potentially a very dangerous sport. In fact, in the last couple of days, a diver's gone missing off Melbourne. No one knows why. They haven't found the body, and I presume there will be a body as yet. So you really need to be in control the whole time, and I think that's a really important part of your life in general, just learning self-control. Education is also a really important attribute in scuba diving. Gone are the days when I first learned to scuba dive many decades ago, I won't say how many decades ago, where you went and just did a dive course and off you went and you could go anywhere in the world and dive. You still can do that, but most divers these days see it as a lifelong process. And so they'll go and do a wreck diving course or a cave diving course, or importantly, something like a rescue diving course. For some people, that education actually leads to working in an industry. So some people will go all the way up to instructor level, for example, and the world is really their oyster. They can go anywhere in the world where there is an ocean and earn an income from that. Education also can be looked at in a slightly different way. You can think about education, self-education. So many scuba divers get incredibly passionate about a particular type of marine life. My colleague up the front here, Steve Smith, is passionate about tiny, tiny little cowrie shells, these little ovulates. And he'll go to almost any length to go for a dive, even in freezing cold waters, to go and find these little ovulates. Some people, and most scuba divers, are engaged with the fish that they see, and there are many hundreds of fish that we have in our marine park out here, and they will spend hours, days, months even, looking at photos and images of fish. So you can educate yourself about different types of organisms that you see out there. Travel's a big one. We all like to go to nice exotic places, and for divers, those exotic places are things like the Coral Triangle in Indonesia, where you have this incredible biodiversity of a whole range, not just coral, but a whole range of critters. And I have to say, at this time of the year, the water's also a darn sight warmer. And like a lot of fraternities, I guess we could call them, you get to hang out with like-minded individuals. You know, I've been a member of a surf club in the past, for example, and obviously share a lot of common interests and common values with those sorts of people. And it's the same with divers. Most divers have got an incredible and passionate interest in the marine life that reside in their local area and elsewhere on the planet. And it's the marine life itself. Overall, it's the marine life. That's really why divers dive. And what do they see? They see these tiny, tiny, tiny little critters from the macro, from a tiny squid up, I should use this, from a tiny squid to one of Steve's. I put this one in for Steve, a tiny little ovulate. You can see someone's thumb there. And on this host soft coral, we've got a tiny crab that looks like it as well. We've got a little sea spider, and we've got a tiny little fish on a gorgonia. Then you've got the mega. So you can be swimming around and seeing these tiny, tiny little critters, and then on the same dive, it might be that you see some of the megafaunal animals we have in the oceans. You know, these guys swimming up the coast at present. All of these species here, in fact, all of these species on this slide we can see in the local area. It's pretty amazing stuff. And I also have to say that pretty much all of them, bar the manta ray, are protected species as well, threatened or protected species. So you've got one of the largest fish in the ocean, the Queensland groper. One was caught in my local estuary, Red Rock Creek, not long ago, a juvenile, up to about 7 kilo. Totally different coloration to that, but here's one of the largest fish in our planet living in my shallow little local estuary. It's pretty amazing stuff. Things like the black rock cod. Coffs Harbour is probably, or the Solitary Islands Marine Park, is probably the epicentre of black cod, of the black cod population along the coast of mainland Australia. You can see colourful. Now, not all, some of these critters you don't see in our area here, but certainly we see lots of colourful critters out here. So over here we've got a pygmy seahorse. We've got a mandarin fish, one of the most sex-charged critters on the whole planet. Basically has sex every night of the year, non-stop. We've got these beautiful, delicate little tunicates. We've got some little sea slugs, and we've got this wonderful colourful mantle of a giant clam. So these are the sorts of things divers want to see. Some things are a little bit harder to see. So we have a whole range of cryptic critters as well. So up here you might be able to just make it out, which is another type of sea slug, a nudibranch. Down here we've got a sole. Down here we've got the tail and head of a member of the scorpion fish family, with heaps of venomous spines. And this is a photo I took just a couple of days ago down at Port Stephens of a flathead, which is really a cryptic species, blends in beautifully with its background, and in its jaws we've got a little fortescue that it's just caught. Maybe it's just the downright bizarre, the really weird things, and you do see really weird things out there that are just, my God, what's going on here? So this is, you know, the bottom of a local sea star, for example. And the others, I think, well, you can make your mind up about those. And then finally, some of them are you just can't put into words. So it is the opportunities to see all these weird and wonderful critters and amazing behaviours that really draw so many scuba divers, or many people, into the world of scuba diving. So what is it that scuba divers would advocate for the Solitary Islands Marine Park? Well, you know, I guess here I'm giving my view of what scuba divers would like to think about the marine park. And for me, it's all summed up in the objects of the Act. Nothing else. Okay? It's summed up in the objects of the Act. And the objectives of the Act are the first two objectives of these guys up here. First one's all about trying to maintain biodiversity, and it's been incredibly heartening to hear so many other speakers from different stakeholder groups here today all talking about sustainability and the maintenance of biodiversity, because really that's what we're all after. So it's about biological diversity and habitats, because it's those critical habitats that help the maintenance of biodiversity, and really importantly, the ecological processes. And ecological processes, in simplistic terms, I think, simply means that we know that we have food chains, we know that we have food webs, There have to be certain processes which occur in those food webs so that biological diversity is going to be maintained. They're the first two objects of the Act. Okay, they're the, probably the prime objects of the Act. And then there is a third one, which basically says, when consistent with the preceding objects, to provide for the ecologically sustainable use of fish and marine vegetation, and to provide opportunities for public appreciation, understanding and enjoyment of marine parks. Now, have I got that right, Nicola? Thank you. So really, what it's saying is this up here, that marine parks want people to use them. They want to be loved by people. They want all sorts of people from, to carry out the activities that they want, as long as we can make sure that biodiversity and ecological processes are concerned. Now obviously, scuba divers are a user group, and we want lots of things that other user groups actually want as well. For example, any boaters, any fishers, any spearos, we all want to get access to the park. And so we all want to make sure that we've got boat ramps and we've got boat launching facilities. Jeff was talking about one of the problems for fishers in knowing whether they're in a sanctuary zone or not. And I can understand that. I don't think the lines on the map are helpful in that regard. So again, I think that along with with other stakeholder groups, we'd really like to see straight lines on maps. Just makes it so much easier to know where you could be, whether you're in a sanctuary zone or not. Increasingly, the Solitary Islands Marine Park is becoming recognised not only locally, but statewide, nationally and even internationally as a really, really important place. And that's in part due to some of the physical characteristics of the waters of SIMP. And both Steve and Nicola alluded to them. There's this mixing of tropical and temperate waters. And I've often been on boats, on charter boats, where you've had visiting divers come in and they're just blown away by what it is that they see out there. You'll often get divers from Queensland who dive on the Great Barrier Reef coming down and just cannot believe the luxurious growth of coral and the numbers of species of corals, for example, we have in this area. There are divers from other parts of Australia that come back not just once a year, 2 and 3 times a year from places as far afield as, say, South Australia to dive the waters off here because they do recognise that they're quite unique. And obviously, it's the opportunity to dive with a range of really, well, iconic species like manta rays and the like. Also, the evidence does suggest that scuba divers cause little, if any, environmental damage. Now, I'm not saying there is no environmental damage done by scuba divers. That's a nonsense. They certainly do. Usually, it's divers who are newly qualified. But training regimes put in place these days by training agencies address this sort of issue a lot more. It's basically when divers come into the contact with the bottom. Okay, so in areas like our sanctuary zones out here, people are encouraged, in fact it's a real no-no, to actually touch critters, whether it be a coral, an ascidian, whatever it might be on the bottom. Don't go turning over rocks, don't go turning over old lumps of coral. But a big part of diver training programs these days is all about what we call low impact diving. And it's becoming more and more commonplace in right around the world. This might be a bit contentious, and I'm sorry if I get anyone offside here, but look, I really think that scuba divers, perhaps more than most groups, are really keen to see that representative areas of each of the diverse habitats that we have out here are protected in a sanctuary zone. So Steve, when he gave his presentation earlier today, talked about some of the newer types of habitats that have been found in the marine park due to newer types of technologies. Then scuba divers believe that representative areas of those habitats need to be protected in sanctuary zones. When we look at a survey that was conducted on behalf of the New South Wales Government, I think it was 2008, found that 79% of respondents, and that's not limited to just scuba divers, but all respondents were in favour of sanctuary zones, 5% against, with 16% being ambivalent about that. So the overwhelming number of respondents were supportive of the concept of sanctuary zones, these no-take zones. I think there would be universal agreement amongst the diving community that we need to do something, seriously do something about our protected and threatened marine species. And one of the things that we need to do is to get a better handle on the species that belong to this group. There is work being done up and down the coast now on black cod populations. And interestingly, just in the last probably 12 months, maybe not even that long, for the first time we've started to find out something about the juvenile stages of black cod. And one of the things we're finding is that they're turning up in rock pools along particular types of rocky platforms where anyone can walk down and have a browse across the rock platform. We didn't really know that up until a year or so ago. But black cod aren't the only threatened and protected species out there. The community, the general community, the general diving community are going to have a role to play, we hope, in northern New South Wales of finding more about these sorts of populations. It really, really narks scuba divers to still see grey nose shark, trailing hooks and lines with being tail roped. We still see that occurring, years after that species was listed as a critically threatened species. I'd also like to make the point that, scuba divers, like a lot of you people, you don't just fit neatly into one user group. So amongst the diving fraternity, you'll find beach walkers, you'll find surfers, spearos, like myself, keen recreational fishermen. And so I think in one sense, scuba divers have a really holistic view about what the marine park's all about. Doesn't mean that our voice should be heard over anyone else's, but I just think we have this really holistic view from that point. Locally, Bob Palmer was talking about tourism. The numbers of divers visiting our area is increasing. I've got some 2008 figures here. There was just over 7,000 passenger movements on the dive charter boats. So we've got, I think there are, Nicola might be able to tell me, 4 dive charter businesses operating in the park, I think. I think at this time there might have only been 3. An average of $100. So at that time it was worth just over 700,000, and I would hazard a guess that it would be more than that, well over that by now. So do scuba divers actually contribute to the marine park? Many of the user groups are extractors, and scuba divers in one sense are an extractor as well, because we go down, we take our photos, we take all these wonderful images away, we take all these experiences away from us. But like land care groups around Australia, there is also a local group, the Solitary Islands Underwater Research Group, who are actually putting something back into the park. This group, and I'll refer to them as Surge, is simply made up of local community members. They come from all walks of life, from tradies through to professionals, through to teachers and whatever. And basically what they've been doing since probably about the 1990s really, has been participating in citizen science activities. They've been conducting scientific monitoring and assessment activities in the marine park. And some of what they've found is actually underpins some of the management and zoning considerations in the marine park. In doing that, we had close working relationships with the Marine Parks Authority, and prior to that with New South Wales Fisheries, and in particular staff here from the National Marine Science Centre. And in both instances, collaborative projects have been undertaken. I'm not the only member who's represented scuba divers on SIMPAC and MPEC. One of our other members also has. So what sorts of things have we done? I'm not going to go over these in great detail. I'll just pick out a few of them. Starting at the top here, we've produced, this is before the digital age, I've got to say. We produced these identification cards, which we used to sell locally in a number of outlets to help fund some of our activities. And we were pretty chuffed with these ones because we did receive a request from the British Museum of Natural History for a set of these cards. We thought that was pretty swish. We've aided tertiary students, postgraduate students, conducting masters and PhD work over the years with their activities. This is a really important one. If you go onto the Surge website, you will see a photographic reference library, and this is being used increasingly by people outside our local area. There are hundreds and hundreds of species in that photographic library. A really important part of what we do. We've been involved in public displays, the usual Clean Up Australia days and the like. We've presented papers at things like the New South Wales Coastal Conference, for example. And we've assessed benthic community structure, in other words, the structure of all those critters which are living on the bottom of the ocean, adjacent to the major islands. We looked at coral bleaching, coral disease, several years back. And more recently, and I'll just pick a couple of these, we've looked at marine debris loads. This is an important one, and we can find our assessments to sanctuary zones. 70% of all of the debris that we found in sanctuary zones was fishing related, okay? Fishing related. And so you would often find line, hooks, sinkers, these sorts of things, even lures, wrapped around lumps of coral in sanctuary zones. At present, we're involved in two projects. We've got fundings through the New South Wales Environmental Trust and through a federal government initiative to do two things. And one of those is looking at a targeted list of fish species. One of the things we know anecdotally at the moment is that there are lots of range extensions of fish species occurring. So, a paper came out a couple of years ago from CSIRO which showed that species you wouldn't expect to see are turning up in Tasmania. The giant Queensland groper, the coral trout have turned up in Tassie over recent years, for example. So there's over 50 species of fish that have turned up in these really southern waters. And so we're part of a statewide effort, which I'll just mention briefly in a moment, to look at range extensions in fish species. The other thing we're doing at the moment is that we're looking at the health of coral communities in the marine park. And again, we've sort of jumped on the back of a large project arising from Queensland University called Coral Watch. And so we're looking at 5 families of corals that are prone to bleaching, and we're conducting assessments over the next 3 years of those corals. And that brings me to this, subtidal monitoring by community volunteers in New South Wales. There's another initiative happening at the moment called Underwater Volunteers New South Wales. And I just want to point out that there are other community-based scuba diving groups who are giving back, not just taking, who are giving back. And they include the Byron Underwater Research Group, there's us, there is the Great Lakes Underwater Group and the Combined Hunter Underwater Group working in a marine park. There is the Jarvis Bay Dive Club, the Nature Coast Marine Group are also working in marine parks along the New South Wales coastline. And we're all using standardised techniques to try and find snapshots of debris loads and these range extensions that I was talking about a little earlier. So that there are these scuba diving community-based underwater research groups hoping to put something back into marine conservation in the same way that land care, dune care groups do in terrestrial environments. So what do we hope? Well, we hope that the state government implements the recommendations of the recent scientific audit with some qualifications. We believe that the science is there, and it is robust. I mean, that's just it for 2 marine parks, a whole list. And, you know, as Steve said before, you should have a flick through there. I think you'll be a little bit gobsmacked about just how much work has been done, which underpins zoning and management decisions in marine parks. We would urge the government to adopt the zone plan that was revoked back in May 2011. And with that one here, I know that, you know, I think as being involved in that process, that no stakeholder group was entirely happy with the outcome of that zone process. And because no stakeholder group was happy, then probably the government got it right, or Marine Parks got it right. That's one way of looking at it. And failing that, you know, under the Act, the Marine Parks Act, there has to be review of these zone plans after a 5-year period or 10-year period, whatever it was. There has to be. And so, failing these, then the government should, in my opinion, even though we're all zone planned out, and I've got to say I'm not really happy about having to go to too many more meetings about this stuff because I'm almost over it, but they really should start that process again with the aim of making sure that they address the objects of the Act. And remember, the objects are all about the maintenance of biodiversity and habitats and ecological processes. When they've ensured that's happened, then providing for human use. Thank you.